This is episode 48 of Cinescope, and I'm the most famous person in all of Greece. I'm an action figure! Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today is Chris Lyndon to talk about one of our favorite films, Hercules. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It was nice to revisit this film. I hadn't seen it in many years.
Same for me as well, and I'll talk about it here in a few minutes. I have a very special connection to this movie. But before we dive into that, Chris, how about you reintroduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, where else we might know you from, all that kind of good stuff.
Well, a lot of people know me as Disney Chris on social media. I have a website called DisneyChris.com. which is home to the Disneyland Magical Audio Tour, and I have almost 1,400 audio tracks from Disneyland that you can listen to, and other features like my Disney Song of the Day and things of that nature. I also host a podcast called Jiminy Crickets, a Disney-themed podcast. We cover Disney news, nostalgia, movies, theme parks, anything Disney. I also am pretty active on social media, and you can find me on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm just all over the place. Big Disney fan. I guess you could call me a Disney historian.
I think that would probably be a pretty apt description of who you are. And following you on Twitter and Facebook especially, you really get a glimpse into the world of Disney that I don't think a lot of other people offer. So you get, like you said, the Disney Song of the Day. That's always fun because it's usually an older song that is very nostalgic if you're familiar with it, or if you're not familiar with it, is a great treat to explore for the first time. And then all sorts of Disney news and memorabilia, and you're just a great person to follow if you're even remotely a fan of Disney.
Well, thank you.
And of course, you were on the show once previously, back in episode 10 when we talked about the classic Pinocchio. And we were going to talk about another classic this week. We were going to talk about Alice in Wonderland, but then yesterday, as of this recording, was the 20th anniversary of Hercules. So I said, hey, Chris, maybe sometime in the future we could talk Alice in Wonderland, but, let's maybe revisit this one. And I'm glad you obliged, and I'm certain we'll have you on again in the future to maybe revisit Alice.
No problem. I'm happy to talk about Hercules. I enjoy this film.
One more thing before we move on to our main discussion. I want to put the giveaway reminder here at the beginning of the episode this time, because there are a lot of people out there making it really easy for very few people to win this giveaway. So we are in the final month of the movie giveaway for Cinescope, leading up to our 1-year anniversary. After this episode, we are only 4 episodes away. If you want the chance to win 1 or even 2 movies of your choice, any movie that we've talked about on the show all the way through episode 52, when we will announce the winner, if you want that, make sure to head over to iTunes and rate and review the show, and or share the show and tag us so that I see your post. That means you have up to 2 entries if you choose one or the other or both. So there are 3 winners, 1 person winning 2 movies, the other 2 winning 1 movie apiece. So if you don't want to make it so easy for some other people, make sure you get in there in these final few weeks so that you can walk away with a new movie of your choice. That out of the way, I'm ready to talk about some Hercules. How about you, Chris?
Indeed.
Okay, well, this movie came out, as I said, on June 27th of 1997. It was directed by John Musker and Ron Clements, who together also directed for Disney The Great Mouse Detective, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Treasure Planet, The Princess and the Frog, and Moana. So these guys pretty much kick-started the Disney Renaissance of the 1990s, starting with The Little Mermaid, and even today they're making a huge impact in the Disney world with films like Moana, which I saw earlier this year and I loved. It was written by the duo Clements and Musker, as well as with Donald McHenry, Bob Shaw, and Irene Mecchi. The music is by Disney favorite Alan Menken, who composes scores and music for The Little Shop of Horrors, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, both 1991 and 2017 versions, Newsies, Aladdin, Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Enchanted, and Tangled. And the lyrics this time are by David Zippel, who also wrote the lyrics for the next movie in the 1990s Disney lineup, Mulan, with music by Matthew Wilder. And he also wrote the lyrics for Star Spangled Man, which is the song that appears in Captain America, the First Avenger, which Alan Menken also composed. Now, the cast for this movie, got several names to list. It stars Tate Donovan, Danny DeVito, James Woods, Susan Egan, Bobcat Goldthwait, Matt Frewer, Rip Torn, Samantha Eggar, Lillias White, Cheryl Freeman, LaShawns, Roz Ryan, Venice Y. Thomas, Josh Keaton, Roger Bart, Frank Welker, Jim Cummings, and a special appearance by Charlton Heston. So let's go ahead and get started with it, Chris. What was your first experience with this movie?
I saw the movie when it was first released. I had just recently graduated from college, and I had moved out to Southern California, and I was living in the San Diego area, and I was really excited to see this film because when it was in production, I was actually working at Walt Disney World in Florida for the Walt Disney World College program, and part of the college program, you have to attend a series of classes. And in one of the classes, they had some of the animators from Walt Disney Animation come and talk to us. And they showed us some clips of Hercules when it was still in production. We were getting a very rare first-hand view of this film before pretty much anybody else outside the Disney studio had a chance to see it. And I was really excited about it, just from what I had seen in that class. They also showed us clips from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was just about to be released. And so it was really, really exciting to talk to animators and learn their perspective and what went into creating Hercules. So by the time it came out, I was really excited to see it, and it didn't disappoint. I remember really enjoying it, and even though it's not really thought of as much as some of the other Disney Renaissance films, I would probably consider it my favorite Disney Renaissance film out of all of them, believe it or not. That's how much I liked it. I just liked the whole vibe of it, and the music and the characters, and the animation is top notch. I just really enjoyed it.
I'm impressed that you're willing to admit so publicly that this is one of your favorite Disney Renaissance. Not that it's a bad film, but it's definitely not the typical choice. You know, most people would lean towards Lion King or Beauty and the Beast, or maybe even something like Aladdin, or I don't know, something along those lines. And I think it's great that you chose Hercules because it is such a unique offering from the Disney studios in that time. Right. It's definitely not nearly as traditional in its presentation. You have this Greek drama laid out in this hugely colorful way, framed with this gospel choir singing chorus. And it's just such a unique approach. And so I'm really interested to hear you say that it's your favorite of that time period. I think that's very cool, and I don't think I can really argue with it because, like I said, this is a movie that I have always had a very strong connection to, and that is because I was 5 years old when this movie came out, and this is the first movie that I have actual memories of seeing in the movie theater. It's my very first movie theater memory experience. So for that reason, this movie has a very, very special place in my heart. I saw it with my grandmother at the time, and I actually remember sitting there in the theater, little 5-year-old Chad, the scene when Hercules is diving after Meg in the River of Death, cheering for him. You can do it, Hercules, you can do it. I out loud in the theater, this little 5-year-old. I remember this. So it stands out as just something that's very important in the very early formation of my interest in movies and in Disney and in just this brand of storytelling. I wouldn't call this my favorite Disney film, but it's dear to my heart, And revisiting it last night in its entirety for the first time in many years, like you said, was actually a pretty emotional experience, just as I think back to my childhood and what this movie meant to me then, and seeing it with my grandmother at such an early age, and the nostalgia tied with it, and also just experiencing the story anew as an adult and really getting wrapped up in, one, the mythology, and two, just the very archetypal, in a good way, very emotional story. I also remembered while watching that I actually dressed as Hercules for a Halloween event or some sort of school program of some sort at an early age. So, like I said, this movie made a big impact on me as a kid. The story itself isn't super unique. It's just basic archetypal hero's journey. And talking about Man of Steel on last episode, it's very much sort of the Greek mythological version of Superman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody would really argue with you on that point. It's very much Superman-esque, but it's the charm that's brought to the screen here. It's the identity that comes from the package it's wrapped up in that make it stand out as such a fun film. It's gorgeous. It's extremely colorful animation, and the style of the animation, the actual lines and shapes of everything is very reminiscent of sort of the stereotypical Greek artwork from that time and place, at least what we see on like pottery and museums and stuff like that. Maybe not exactly what was depicted on those vases also long ago, but in the public consciousness, when you think Greek, it's very much sort of what you see in this film as far as character design goes.
Yes, it has sort of an architectural look to it. The characters do, especially their hair. It's got a lot of curls that are stylized that remind me of Greek columns and things like that. The way the clothing is draped reminds me of Greek statues. They're definitely trying to channel, Greek art through this film, classic Greek art. Another interesting thing about the story is that, as Disney is wont to do very often, they definitely took some liberties with the original Greek myth of Hercules, in that instead of having Hercules be the illegitimate son of Zeus who had an affair with a human being, which is why Hercules was only a demigod, so he had the strength of a god, but he was a human. Instead, in this story, they opted to leave out the adultery, because it is a children's film.
Probably a good choice.
And they instead had the character of Hades have his henchmen give Hercules a potion to turn him into a human being, but he had to drink every last drop of the potion, and he missed the last little drop. And that is why he still retained the power of a god, even though he was a human being. So they made it a little less controversial for children. And also, they really wanted to incorporate Hades into the plot. So that gave them an excuse, a reason to have Hades be the villain of the story. I mean, a lot of the elements are derived directly from Greek mythology, but Disney definitely took some liberties with it.
Yes, they did, and it makes it all the more touching. Instead of having Hercules be sort of this outcast for societal taboos, being a bastard child, instead of that, he's sort of a fallen from grace character. He was a god, and he's lost that status, and now the rest of his journey is about regaining that status and proving that he belonged among them. And I think that just adds a whole lot more weight to the story as a whole. It's not about this guy trying to prove something that he ultimately isn't. He's not a demigod trying to prove he's a god. He's a fallen god, a fallen immortal,
right,
trying to get back to that status. And I really like that twist, that change in the story. What else about the story do you like here?
I do enjoy Meg's story art. I find her character and her whole, appearance in this film to be very interesting. At one point, when they do a little exposition on Meg's backstory, you discover that the reason she's a prisoner of Hades is because she wanted to save the life of the man she loved. So she sold her soul to Hades to save his life, but then he ended up leaving her for another woman. So she definitely is a woman who's been wronged, and has some bitterness and resentment in her. But then she learns to fall in love again because she falls in love with Hercules. I really, and she becomes a good person. She never really was a villain per se, but due to circumstances, she kind of had no choice but to perform villainous acts, being Hades' prisoner. So I enjoy that. And I also really enjoy Hades, but we'll talk about characters in a minute.
Yes, we will, for sure. The only other big thing about the story itself that I have to point out is just the humor of it all. The humor is charming. There's plenty of pop culture references, as there always are in Disney films, but they're just almost on a different level this time around. There's these culture references, there's these puns, such as in the training sequence with Phil, when Hercules and Phil and Pegasus are on the poles or the columns, and they are doing the Karate Kid crane sequence. Or when they first go to Thebes, Phil says, "Welcome to the Big Olive. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere," which is the big New York reference.
The Big Apple.
Yeah. There's right before the Hydra scene when Hercules is rescuing the two quote unquote boys, Pain and Panic. And one of them says, disguise, "Somebody call IXII," instead of 911 because, hey, Roman numerals.
Right.
And then right after that scene, after Hercules has defeated the colossal Hydra and all of its many heads via destroying the cliff, Phil says, "You won by a landslide." And it's just such a tongue-in-cheek, obvious joke, but it lands so perfectly with Danny DeVito's delivery. And there are so many moments like that throughout the entire film that, I don't think the story itself is overly childish anyways. I think there's plenty here for adults to grab onto without that kind of higher level humor. But that the presence of these really clever references and puns just makes it even more accessible for an older audience.
Right. In the spirit of Mel Brooks comedies, it's got a lot of... It takes place in the past, but it's kind of like a surreal past in that all the references are to modern day things. And hero worship was something people were thinking a lot about in the late 90s. And I actually read that when they were thinking about Hercules' popularity, they were comparing him to Michael Jordan. He was the Michael Jordan of his era. He was like a sports hero. And they also were influenced by screwball comedy films, such as those directed by Preston Sturges and Frank Capra. And the young Hercules was inspired by Jimmy Stewart's character in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, believe it or not. And Meg is modeled after Barbara Stanwyck, who was kind of a sassy, know-it-all broad in a lot of film noir movies from the late 40s and 50s, such as The Lady Eve and Meet John Doe. So they were inspired by a lot of classic Hollywood when it came to this film, and also pop culture of the 90s. They had like sandals that were Air Hercules, referencing Air Jordan shoes. Instead of sneakers, they were sandals, though, because they didn't have that's what people wore in Greek times, were sandals. And they had like a big gulp that was shaped like a Roman column, and it just like they were just kind of poking fun at the whole, pop culture, and saying they were acquainting, Hercules' popularity to the popularity of superstars of the 90s. So That was very interesting. And I love the tongue-in-cheek modern-day references. It's really clever. A lot of fun. They kind of did that in Aladdin, too, with the genie especially. So this is kind of a progression of that idea for Disney.
Yeah, with Aladdin, of course, you had Robin Williams just sort of let loose in a recording studio. So
Right.
it's interesting that they went in that direction a little bit more purposefully in this one. And I think it fits. Thebes very much
Right.
was a sort of cultural center, and so was New York. And Hercules very much was a popular athlete, and so was Michael Jordan. And you can see the obvious parallels with sponsorships and with cheering fangirls and all these kind of things that remind you and make you reminisce to the popularity of stars then and even stars today. It's very tongue in cheek in that way, and I think they pull it off very well. It's those are just, they add to the fun of the movie. Well, let's go ahead and start talking about characters then. So first off on my list, for some reason, is Hercules himself. So what do you have to say about Hercules?
He was a means to an end in this film. Well drawn and, very well animated. I loved his look, but he was more of a plot device than anything else. His character wasn't that fully developed compared to some of the others in this film. But there's no fault in that because that's his purpose. He moves the plot forward, and he's not really meant to be, as colorful as some of the other characters in this film. So it doesn't bother me that he's like that. But compared to some of the other standouts in this, he's definitely not the most flamboyant of the characters. He's a little low-key compared to the others.
Right. He's definitely not as much of a standout as James Woods' Hades, but
right.
I think it's just as interesting a lot of times to find a character who doesn't change as much. So you look at Captain America, and what's interesting about Captain America is that he holds true to his values. No matter what, he's always going to be Captain America, tried and true. This is what I believe in, and I'm never going to waver. And that's sort of what Hercules is in this movie. And Superman in that same sense. His talents, like Superman here, leave him as an outcast. He can't reconcile his differences from others with his desire to fit in. And when he is given a goal to strive towards, this is who I am, and this is where I'm going to be, I'm going to do everything in my power to prove that that is who I am. And he goes on, he gets fed up with the whole sponsorship of it all. He doesn't like the stardom. He wants to be with his parents. When he's confronted with the truth of Meg is the only time he really sort of falters in the film, because she's the first truly great thing he's had going in his life. He's been an outcast. He's been on this journey. He's not been so successful so far in becoming a true hero, but there's this girl and he likes her a whole lot. And when he finds out about her involvement with Hades, he's in denial at first because, hey, why take this away from me? But then he reaches the point where he can't deny it anymore. She was definitely working for Hades, and he can't ignore that anymore.
Right.
And that betrayal demoralizes him, and it's painful to him to the point that he opts to straight up sacrifice himself rather than suffer another moment of heartbreak. It's not him jumping off a cliff and committing suicide. It's him almost doing the equivalent of that, though, going into this situation where he's unlikely to come out on the other side of it alive because he's just hurting so badly. But Phil comes back, he cheers him on, he gives him hope, he bounces back, and then later in the film he's gotten his powers back, and the moment he's finally able to prove himself a true hero is at the moment he sacrifices himself for Meg's life. So it's this time it's not a careless sacrifice or an unmotivated sacrifice. This one is entirely motivated and entirely driven to rescue the woman he loves. And that's what makes it meaningful. But what's cool is that's not the end of his arc. Yes, he's reached the ultimate goal that he set out on at the beginning of the film, but he learns and discovers within himself that that's not really what he wants anymore. He shows that immortality is no longer his ultimate goal, and instead he chooses to go back to the life he's always known. It's sort of like a you never know what you got till it's gone kind of situation, where he looks down as he's celebrating with the gods and sees that Meg isn't going to be able to live in Mount Olympus. She's never going to be a god, but he can go back to the life he's always known and spend it with somebody he loves. And that is his whole arc, is setting out on this journey, stumbling just a little bit, reaching his ultimate goal, and then realizing that's not what he wanted. And I think there's something to be said, and it's a pretty basic goal, but it touches the heartstrings no matter what.
Right.
Now, just to talk about Meg a little bit more, you talked about her a little bit earlier. Is there anything else you have to say about her?
She's definitely a favorite. A lot of the Disney princesses, even though she's not a princess, she's kind of the princess type in this film. She's not the typical Disney heroine. She's more sassy. She's kind of, she doesn't have to depend on a man. She's got her own mind. And Disney had done some earlier characters like that, like probably Belle from Beauty and the Beast could be considered that too, but I think they went a little bit more beyond with Meg, and also she's a little more realistic than Belle was, and she's got attitude, sarcasm, she's constantly rolling her eyes, and she's not overly excited by anything, I mean, all these amazing things happen right in front of her eyes, and she's never that impressed by it.
Right.
I just like that. I just find her to be, fun, She's probably fun at parties.
Well, as you said earlier, she's cynical because she has had a pretty
Yes.
rotten life. She sacrifices herself essentially for this man she loves, only to be abandoned for another woman. And that hurts. She's been hurt, and she's wary of her affection for Hercules.
Right.
And the thing is, we see that she's not only fearful for her feelings, but also for the well-being of Hercules and the danger of her being used against him. That's a slow progression, and it sort of, you see the culmination of that in I Won't Say I'm in Love, where she's saying, yes, I love him, but I'm not going to admit that to anybody because I'm not going to let myself get hurt like that. And what's cool about Meg is ultimately she provides the example for Hercules. When he has had his powers stripped away, yes, he's just defeated the Cyclops, but he's about to get killed by this falling column. And she decides, I've got to save him. I've got to push him out of the way. He and what he stands for is greater than anything I am. And I've spent this whole movie acting against him and trapping him and working for Hades. And so she sacrifices herself. She pushes him out of the way and is ultimately killed because of her injuries. And what's cool is that that's the example that Hercules has for doing the same thing just a couple short scenes later, where he ultimately sacrifices himself. Even though he comes out victorious and doesn't actually die, he goes in with the intention of doing just that because he's just witnessed her doing the same for him. And, people do crazy things for being in love. So I like that she sort of flips the hero on his side. She's sort of an unexpected variable in his equation.
Right.
Now, what about Phil, Mr. Danny DeVito's character?
Well, Phil basically just is Danny DeVito.
I won't disagree with that, but
I mean, I like Danny DeVito, but I don't know if he's right for this film. I don't. It didn't bother me that much, but I would have liked to have seen somebody else in that role and take it in a different direction rather than have Danny DeVito be in the film, because basically it's not a character, an original character that Disney created. It's just Danny DeVito animated, and there's nothing all that original or special about it. I think with the genie, Disney brought something original and special, and Robin Williams was a character. Even though he played himself in some regard, he also was playing a part. It didn't feel like it was Robin Williams. You were convinced that you were watching a genie, not Robin Williams. Whereas with Danny DeVito, I was never convinced that I was not watching Danny DeVito. It's just Danny DeVito in a little goat person's body. He didn't ruin the film for me, obviously, because it's, like I said, my favorite Disney Renaissance film. And I do like Danny DeVito as an actor and a performer, but for this particular film, I would have liked to have seen somebody else do that role. A lot of people auditioned for that part. Red Buttons, who played, who was in the original Pete's Dragon, auditioned for that part. And at the end of the audition, he turned to the casting directors and said, "You're going to pick Danny DeVito, aren't you?" So, not a standout performance for me, but it was good. It was okay, and it didn't bother me as far as the film as a whole. How do you feel about him?
Well, I won't argue that he is very much Danny DeVito animated, but more just the character himself, the journey he goes on. At the beginning of the film, he's, like Meg, stubborn and cynical because he's experienced disappointment in the past. He's gone through all these people, all these heroes that he's trained, or heroes to be, or hero wannabes that he's trained and ultimately have failed. And he reveals that he had a dream at one point in time. He wanted the gods to put this constellation in the sky of a hero, and everybody would look up and say, "Hey, that is Phil's boy. He had a part in making that person who he is, and it's worth pointing out." He wants recognition for his contributions, but he sets those aside and he says dreams are for chumps because he's been let down so many times. But throughout the course of the film, he grows and he starts putting his faith in Hercules because he really has something special. But eventually, you see, it's not for the chance of the fulfillment of his dream, but because he actually starts growing affection for Hercules. You know, he's been alone all these years. He's been spying after nymphs and living by himself and just growing apart from everything. He hasn't had a meaningful relationship in a long time. And Hercules is the first instance of that coming into his life, and he grows attached. And it becomes not so much about his dream anymore, but Herc and reaching what Herc is aspiring. So seeing him go on that journey, but then still get rewarded by having his original dream fulfilled, even though he sort of let it go, that's so rewarding to me, is seeing at the end of the film when the muses are singing "A Star Is Born," and we look up and Zeus is conjuring this constellation, and we hear, well, first Phil's eyes brighten, and then we hear, "That's Phil's boy," just the way he said. And it's an emotional moment because that is what Phil has been wanting for a very, very long time. And so watching his character, yes, Phil is very much probably the biggest element of comedic relief in this movie just because it is Danny DeVito. But still, his character does have a sort of a journey to go on. And I like the payoff of that in the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's well written. I mean, what you like about him is the way he was written. And I don't have any problem with that. In fact, every character in this was very well written. And I wouldn't want to have the script changed at all, or his journey, or, you know, his plot in this film. But I think that it would have been more effective. That character, you know, would be more effective had somebody who wasn't a caricature of themselves portray that part. You know, somebody with good comedy chops, but not somebody that can't really go out of their comfort zone as far as acting. Because Danny DeVito pretty much always plays the same part.
Right, and I won't argue with that. But then, just moving on down the list, we have sort of the opposite of that, at least in your eyes, I'm assuming, because we have Hades, who is voiced by James Woods, and he is quite the character. So what do you have to say about James Woods as Hades and the character as presented in the film?
Well, unlike Danny DeVito, James Woods was playing a character, because that's not the way James Woods acts in every single movie that he's in. So when he did Hades, he was channeling a performance. He wasn't just playing himself, you know what I mean? So that makes a big difference. And you don't think, oh, this is James Woods every time he opens his mouth. You know what I mean? But to me, he was probably the best character in the whole film. He was the standout for me, closely followed by Meg. But yeah, he was the number one character. He did a lot of ad-libbing in this, and to me, he's the comedy relief in this. He's comedy gold, the things he said. And I loved how he talked like a Hollywood agent, like, let's do lunch, and those kind of quotes like that. He's definitely channeling like Hollywood hoity-toity people. And I love how as evil as he is and as mad as he gets, there's still something very charming and appealing about him. He's just a likable guy, even though he's a villain. Cleverly animated. I love how his hair is blue fire, and there's a few times where he, has to light a match and it just comes right out of his fingers. And his stylization, very original and unique, and very original creation for Disney. It doesn't seem like they were influenced by anything they had done before. This was something completely new, a new portrayal of a villain for them, and kind of in a way more realistic than a lot of Disney villains, because in real life people are bad, but there's always things that you can like about a person no matter how bad they are. So I just feel he was so cleverly done, and just loved every moment of his on film. A definite favorite for me.
I think Hades was probably the biggest thing praised in this film across the board, even by Roger Ebert, which is funny because there's this one moment where Hades in the film goes 2 thumbs way, way up for our leading lady. And the 2 thumbs up is a obvious Ebert and Siskel and Ebert reference from their TV show. That's their rating system.
Yes.
So that was a fun little reference. And I think that it's apt that you pointed out that he very much talks sort of like a Hollywood exec, and he's very much business, and fast talking, gonna weasel my way into this conversation and get out with what I want and leave you in the dust behind me kind of character. So he's a fun character. We like watching him. He's high energy. He's different. He's got a lot of personality to him. But what's cool about him is that we also see the danger he poses. We see the threat he is to this world. And because of that, he's an effective villain, and we sort of like to hate him. He's not like this. He's not a Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter, where it's just such a despicable character that we hate them naturally. This is a character who's fun to watch, who has evil intentions, and because of that combination, we like to sort of root against them because it's just a unique foil for our main character. The only other characters I had listed are sort of the smaller parts, so I don't have a whole lot to say about them. So just real quick, Pain and Panic, his little demon henchmen sort of people, they're the other sort of primary comedy relief of the film, aside from Phil and from Pegasus. And what's cool about them is the way they're able to transform, and they go from worms to snakes to children to woodland creatures to insects. Right. It's a fun visual gag, just waiting to see what they're going to turn into next, and it's always very appropriate for the situation they're in. So when they turn into worms, they're saying, "We're just worms. We're so far beneath you. We belong in the dust beneath your feet, Hades." And the bugs, when they turn into bugs, are sort of cowering in the shadows and scurrying around on the floor trying to avoid Hades. And so it's always an appropriate transformation to fit the scene. And it's interesting to see what they're going to turn into next.
Yeah, I enjoyed them. I thought they were well done. And again, Bobcat Goldthwait. It was Bobcat Goldthwait playing Bobcat Goldthwait. Just like Danny DeVito, it's pretty much, what you're getting when he's playing a part. But I enjoyed it. I mean, it sounds like I don't like those actors, but I actually enjoy both of them. I don't know. I would have liked to have seen them go rely a little less on the voices and more on the story and the characters, But That's a personal preference. Some people would disagree with me, so who am I to say?
And then we have Pegasus, who's just this fun, trusty sidekick, loyal companion, but also has a whole lot of attitude and isn't afraid to show Hercules when he's upset with him or with Meg.
Yeah, he was channeling Widowmaker from the Pecos Bill. If you've ever seen the 1948 Disney short from the package film Melody Time, the horse that was Pecos Bill's horse was jealous of Slewfoot Sue, and it totally reminded me of that when Pegasus was jealous of Meg. Definitely channeling Widowmaker.
I'll take your word for it because I haven't seen that one.
Oh, you got to see that.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
great
fun little
one.
reference. I'll have to see if I can find it.
I'm sure it's on YouTube.
The last characters I have mentioned are Zeus and Hera, and then Amphitryon and Alcmene, I think is how it's pronounced. So his full set of parents, Hercules' full set of parents, both on Olympus and on Earth. And what I like about them, very similar to Superman again.
Totally reminds me of Superman with his original parents in outer space and then his Earth parents. Same exact plot.
Yes, but they're parents who care for Hercules, and they want him to succeed. They want him to find where he belongs. And ultimately, what makes me most attracted to these parent figures is that they're non-selfish. In the same way Superman's parents are, they would certainly love for Hercules to say, I want to be with you. Whether it's Amphitryon and Alcmene saying, hey, stay with us here in the Greek countryside and you can have a happy life with us for the rest of your life. But they're willing to let him go and find out more about who he is. And then at the end of the film, when Hercules is up in Mount Olympus, he's achieved that goal, but then he decides to leave that behind and to go back to Earth as a mortal. His parents don't throw a hissy fit. They just look down with pride at the man their son has become, and they all allow Hercules to make the decision that is most true to his heart. And that is really what the film is all about. And so I always like watching parent figures who are approving of their children's actions rather than becoming sort of pseudo antagonists about it.
Right, I agree. Also, I would like to give a shout out to the three witches. I forget their names, but they had one eyeball between the three of them, and they had to share the eyeball.
Right. It's Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos.
Oh, thank you. And what I liked about, I loved the eyeball thing. I thought that was hysterical. And I loved how they were the ones who were the final decision that somebody was going to die. They pulled out a string, I guess the string of life. And when that person's time was up, those three witches pulled out their scissor and they had to cut the string. And I just enjoyed that whole setup and the way it was animated. I thought it was clever. And then my other honorable mention would have to be the Hydra, which is, for 1997, this was an amazing piece of computer animation. Most of the film is, of course, 2D animation, but the Hydra was done in 3D animation. And what's fun about that character is how every time he would cut off their head, it would grow 3 more. So eventually this thing had about 50 heads, and it was pretty amazing how they animated it. I mean, you gotta look at it through a lens of 1997 and not compare it to what they can do today with computer animation, because it does seem dated if you do that. But if you think 1997, this is pretty amazing what they achieved with that character, and I really enjoyed that scene. I thought it was very suspenseful. It had you on the edge of your seat. You didn't know how it was going to end. And yeah, bravo to the Hydra.
Yeah, it's a very cool animated sequence, and I purchased the Blu-ray to watch this movie again, and man, it looks gorgeous on Blu-ray high def.
Yeah.
And that scene, it may be a little bit dated, but I think it looks great.
It does.
Again, especially for 1997. Now, one disappointment I did have with the Blu-ray itself is that there's only really one special feature, which kind of sucks. It's just...
That's been a trend with the Blu-rays. Like when you used to buy, when it was DVD, they'd have a plethora of special features. But with the re-releases, Disney's been a little cheapy on the special features. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it's not. You'd think that with Blu-ray and, it's more expensive, it's more high tech, that they'd want to, put all their best stuff in those packages, but for some reason Disney doesn't do that.
Yeah, I don't understand the stinginess, but one thing that was cool about that short little 10-minute documentary is when they talk about the computer animation sequences, and the major one was definitely the Hydra, but then they sprinkled it in here and there throughout the rest of the film. For like example, on Olympus, instead of fully animating frame by frame the Olympus scenes, they would minimize those frames, and then they would connect the frames together with computer animation, giving Olympus its otherworldly quality, this city built on a cloud visual trick.
Right.
And that's a really cool thing to think about. So yeah, let's go ahead and move on to music. So the music is the other thing that I think is the most talked about part of this film, aside from James Woods' Hades. And it's because you have this incredibly different and 100% unique twist on the traditional chorus of Greek theater. In Greek theater, it was traditional to have a chorus of people who'd stand on the side and would give exposition and would help the story along. I mean, you even see Alan Menken using that technique in Little Shop of Horrors, where you have this trio chorus on the side telling the story.
Right. Kind of channeling the Diana Ross and the Supremes.
Right. And he continues that here. You've got The Gospel Truth, which has a few reprises on the soundtrack, and that's sort of the exposition song. This is the song I'm going to use to tell you exactly what's happening. This is what happened in the past with the Titans and with Zeus and his rise to being Lord over all, in a way. And then after Hercules has fallen, this is the consequence of that. This is how Zeus and Hera reacted, and this is what Hercules has to set out on in life. And they do that a few times throughout the film, where they use gospel truth to really just tell you exactly what's happening.
Right. Kind of every time they need to kind of explain what's happening in the plot, they show up and do a reprise of that number. And when we say they, we're talking about the 5 muses, which are 5 lovely ladies that appear on all sorts of Grecian urns and statues, and they're just kind of any type of art is where they appear. They're able to move throughout any type of artwork that surrounds the characters, which is very interesting. And I love how they're animated, and it's just very magical and fun. They're a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what song it is. I think it might be Zero to Hero, but there's a clip that I've seen floating around online it's a live action clip of 5 women dressed as the muses, and they're performing. I think it's Zero to Hero. I'll look it up and I'll put it in the show notes once I find it. But it was a recording made for animation reference purposes, which is so cool.
Yeah, Disney's been doing that since the 30s. They've been using live models to reference, so that's nothing new, but it's definitely fun to watch when you first see it as animation, and then when you go back and say, oh, wow, that's where they got the ideas. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. And then to continue and sort of conclude the talk on the muses, you've got Zero to Hero and you've got A Star is Born, which are both just absolute earworms.
And they're in the style of gospel music, and you think, what does gospel music have to do with Greek mythology? But for some reason it works. It just, it fits. It just, you don't even think about it. It just seems to connect somehow. And
it gives the film this whole unique sort of energy that you wouldn't get if they had just done entirely traditional kind of music. I really appreciate that new twist on things.
The other standout song is definitely I Won't Say I'm in Love, Meg's song. That's a terrific song. I think that might be my favorite from this film.
Yeah, watching the film last night, that was actually probably my favorite musical sequence to watch as well, just because you have, what's the showcase for Meg? It's the only song she has, and it's very doo-wop this time around,
Yeah.
50s girl group again, but in a less of a gospel way and more of a doo-wop. And then you've got these tongue-in-cheek lyrics where she's talking about, again, at least out loud, I won't say I'm in love, but you know through what you're seeing on screen that I'm definitely in love and I'm falling hard for this guy.
And I love how the muses are her backup singers, but she doesn't see, every time she turns around, they freeze, so she doesn't see them. I thought that was fun. It was clever.
Agreed. And then the other big title song from this movie is Go the Distance.
Mm-hmm.
And it contains Hercules' theme, which is this sort of horn fanfare that you first hear with the title card and with the Olympus reveal at the beginning. And then you hear it again when baby Hercules throws the snake Pain and Panic off the mountain. And that same fanfare introduces Go the Distance when young Hercules first sings it. And it's a perfect hero theme. It expresses his desire to find somewhere to belong, and it grows into confidence, and then it begins his hero's journey. And what's interesting about it is in the film, it's actually segmented into 3, and each of those segments sandwiches these, I don't want to call it exposition, but these story scenes that move everything along. So between the first and the second segment, you've got his Earth parents revealing to him where he came from, or at least where they think he came from and what they found him with, and that they found him to begin with. And then the second and third sandwich another scene where he's speaking to giant Zeus statue, and he finds out that's who he is. I am the son of Zeus. And with each of those story sequences, the song grows into something else. So the first segment is about, this is what I've always dreamed of. And then the next one is, okay, I've got somewhere to start. I'm going off. Here I go. And then the third one is, okay, now I know who I'm supposed to be, and I'm off to prove it. And it's a very cool progression for the song.
The song grows as Hercules, the character, grows.
It does.
The song grows with him.
Yes, and I love Go the Distance. It's one of my favorite Disney song, or 90s Disney songs at least, just because it is the more traditional song of the film. And it's nice to have that contrast this time around. It's the standout because it's the one that's different. Everything else is very sort of city, like One Last Hope. That one has a very sort of urban setting to it, and and that's actually the theme that Menken uses in the score for the cities.
Yeah, very Broadway type number, like a song and dance type number, One Last Hope. Go the Distance that type of song is often referred to as the I Want song. And that was something that Disney started doing with The Little Mermaid, with the song Part of Your World. And then they kind of continued that through most of the Renaissance films. Every main character seemed to have one of those I Want songs, and this is definitely Hercules' I Want number. It's a terrific song. I don't find that there's any real duds in this film. I enjoy every song in this film. And it's got a lot of different styles. The music is all different genres. You got the Broadway show tune number with Phil, and then you've got the doo-wop number with Meg, and then you got the gospel with the muses, and then you got this, kind of sweeping traditional type love ballad type song with Go the Distance. You got that ballad type number. It also, some of the musical references in that song remind me of the movie from the early 80s, Chariots of Fire. It's got kind of that Olympic hero sound to it, It's with the trumpets that play and that type of thing.
Yeah, I hadn't made that connection before, but I can definitely hear that sort of, at least the same sort of ideal as presented by Vangelis and his Chariots of Fire score, the same sort of sonic approaches to the music.
Great score, great music, great score.
And it's so different from, again, what Menken has done in the past. This is hot off of Hunchback of Notre Dame,
right?
Which is what I consider to be Menken's all-time best work. But it's fun to see him go from something so dramatic and so serious and so iconographic with its messages in the music itself of Hunchback of Notre Dame and go into something that's a lot more lighthearted here, but still has a whole lot of variety and showcase of Mencken's ability.
Right, and it definitely has some of that Little Shop of Horrors feel to it, too.
It does.
So,
yeah. Well, let's move on to our final discussion section. Let's talk about the themes of the film, what we sort of take away. So what do you got to start with?
Definitely the main theme of this film is selflessness, giving of oneself to save someone else. I think that's the main takeaway from the film. It's not about you, is basically what it is. Another theme is pop culture, and another theme is life and death. There's all different types of themes going on that have not very much to do with each other, but it's more of a comedy. It's not really meant to be taken as seriously as a film such as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which definitely has more of a moral to it than this does. I mean, it does have the moral, which I just mentioned, but it's more about enjoying the ride on this one and the fun of the experience than it is to take away a lesson from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that being said, you talked about the idea of it not being about you, and that falls into what I said, the meaning of hero and what it takes to become one. And it's definitely about putting yourself aside. There's the quote, "A true hero isn't measured by the size of his strength, but by the strength of his heart." Hercules thinks that if he does heroic things, then he will rejoin the immortals. But it's not about defeating monsters or garnering fame. It's about sacrifice. He sees Meg sacrifice herself for him, and he understands then that true heroism is sacrifice for the ones you love. So he echoes her sacrifice in his own. Then you've also got, sort of in tandem, I've got both the idea of where you belong, about it's where the people you love are, where your heart lies, and then chasing your dreams. I talked earlier about Phil. Phil has chased his dreams for years to no avail. He decides that dreams are for chumps. And, he's been alone for many years. He's grown bitter with distance and with age. And it takes his training of Hercules and the development of genuine affection for Herc, who's chasing his dreams, for Phil to realize that his dreams do have merit. And because of that, he succeeds in the end. It's sort of about taking a more optimistic approach to life, I suppose, is that if you have dreams, you should chase after them, whether you think you're going to achieve them or not. There's no reason to not go for it because, hey, you might just be successful in the end. And Hercules chases his dreams from the opening. And what's cool about Hercules, again, is that his dream changes once he achieves the original one. And he says, this isn't what I want. This isn't what my journey has been about. My journey has been about finding companionship and finding someone here on earth with whom I belong. And your dreams follow your heart. So, anything to add to that?
You pretty much said it all. I stand corrected. I didn't even think about some of those themes. So you did a good. You were able to dig a little deeper than me.
That's what I do. Well, cool. Any final thoughts about the movie itself?
Well, I just want to mention that when I was living in California, I had an annual pass to Disneyland, and they actually had a Hercules parade, and it was amazing. And so this movie kind of stays in my mind more because of that parade. It kind of struck a chord with me at the time, and so it has a lot of fond memories for me. And interesting too is that when they premiered this film, it actually had a premiere in New York City, and they moved the entire Main Street Electrical Parade from California to New York, and it went down Broadway, the Main Street Electrical Parade. And they built a special float just for Hercules at the very end of the parade, and then after the parade, they had the world premiere of the film Hercules, which is kind of a huge gala premiere for this film that kind of did okay at the box office. it kind of didn't meet the expectations of the Disney company. But, compared to some of the other films from that era, like The Lion King and The Little Mermaid, and it did okay. I mean, they made back what they put into it, and then some, but it wasn't a blockbuster hit like some of the other films from that era, which is a shame because, to me, this is the best.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm looking at the box office stuff right now, and Batman and Robin, the Joel Schumacher, I would say abomination if it wasn't such a fun movie. Don't get me wrong, it's a bad movie, but I love it. But that movie came out just a week previous to Hercules, and then a week prior to Hercules, you had Men in Black coming out, the original with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. So, I mean, it was sandwiched by two very popular films, and unfortunately, because this film was more about fun and wasn't as classic a story as something like Beauty and the Beast or Little Mermaid or something along those lines, it did struggle a little bit more in the box office, but it lives on, and I hold it dear to my heart, and it will always be very special to me because of it being the very first movie I remember seeing in theaters. So that's what I hold on to, and just how much fun I have while watching. And it's a good lesson in sort of the hero's journey as well. It's very Star Wars-esque in its approach to following its main character and having a mentor and having a villain and having sidekicks. And it follows everything in a great way, but it, again, brings its own twist.
Yeah, Phil definitely is like the Yoda character in this film.
Yes.
But one last thing I'd like to say is that the villain Hades has become very, very popular in the Disney parks in the last few years. And he's actually featured at all of the special Disney Halloween events. And they often use him as the master of ceremonies for different special stage shows that they do. And he's also featured heavily in a Disney cruise show that they perform for, passengers on the Disney cruise lines called Villains Tonight. He plays the host of Villains Tonight. So that character has definitely developed a sort of cult following in recent years among Disney fandom, which is kind of interesting. But not surprising.
No, I can definitely see how that would work for a character like this, for somebody to step in and be this quick talking, very pop culture reference heavy kind of character. A good way for somebody to test their sort of stand-up comedy chops and acting chops almost at the same time.
Definitely.
Excellent. I think that concludes the official 48th episode of Cinescope. Thank you, Chris, for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a lot of fun to talk about Hercules.
It was, and I'll give you a chance to plug your stuff here again in just a second. Contact for Cinescope. You can find us on Facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and at Cinescope Pod on Twitter. Again, if you're interested in winning movies and helping the show to get a little bit more recognition, please go to iTunes, rate, review, subscribe if you feel so inclined. And if you don't want to use iTunes to enter the contest, you can do that on social media by sharing and tagging us. If you have feedback or ideas, you can email me at thecinescopepodcast@gmail.com. And you can also use that contact if you're interested in co-hosting. If you have a movie that you love that you think you can talk about for a little while, I'd love to have you on. So, 1 month left of the giveaway. Don't forget. Now, Chris, where can people find you online?
Well, sit down, everybody. It'll take a minute. You can find me on Twitter at DisneyChris73. Facebook, I'm Chris Lyndon. That's Lyndon as in Lyndon Johnson. And my website is DisneyChris.com. My podcast is Jiminy Crickets with an exclamation point, and we're on iTunes. And also, I just started kind of concentrating a little more than I have been on my YouTube channel. And I've been posting a new video every week on my YouTube channel. And my YouTube is DisneyChris.com. And that's spelled out DOTCOM. So be sure to check out my weekly video on YouTube.
Awesome. And that'll all be in the show notes for you to see everything comprehensively put together. The best place to find me is at Chadadada on Twitter. That is CHADADADA, and on Facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins. And once again, all the show notes, all of the contact information can be found at thecinescopepodcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thank you, Chris. It's been awesome having you back to talk about one of my favorite classic Disney movies.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 48. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 49. Have fun and celebrate movies. The best place to find me is at Chadadada on Twitter and on Facebook.com/. Well, hold on. I didn't spell it like I normally do.